So, Bill, I just want to quickly thank you for coming on the podcast. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm William Cusick. I go by Bill Cusick. I am the creative director for Stability AI. I joined the company this year. I've spent the last 20 years making films, designing videos, animating, and the better part of the last decade also teaching film and editing and animating and all those things. And I came to Stability after about a year of working with AI tools. I started with like AI audio, specifically working with, training models on my own music, and then got into image generation using some of the NVIDIA tools, the multimodal canvas tool where you could sort of draw segments and then get images from it. And then I quickly got into text to image with Disco Diffusion and Midjourney, Dall-E, and of course, Stable Diffusion. So I've been with Stability since August. I started working with them back in July, so about almost half a year now.
Yeah, time flies. I guess just to start things out, like how much have things changed since you started in July?
Good question. Yeah, it's interesting because the question of like how much do things change is always that like adage, like the more they change, the more they stay the same, And I think what's amazing is this concept of time scale. I was recently introduced to this idea of, depending on when you understand or grow up and understand time, you have a basis for how much evolves in that period of time, like the technological evolution of things, right? And so in the future from now, it's like, in 20 years from now, there'll be 1 year of technological advancements. Won't take a year, it'll take a few months, take like 3 months, right? And at 40 years from now, a whole year of technological advancements will take like 11 days, right? So if I go back, if I think that, okay, 40 years ago, right, and growing up in the 80s, like if that's when I understand time, right, if that's how much I understand time, right? So now it's 40 years later. So I'm living through a year of technological advancements every 11 days is like kind of the, right?
Everything is markers. So if you spend a year on the couch, you're like, nothing really happened this year. But if you're fighting off, let's say, alien invasions and hitting some milestones, every day is one of those big achievements.
The timescale thing is like, I feel like the last 6 months have been the better part of 10 to 11 years. It's like the amount of advancements we've seen 5-6 months is just unprecedented. And at the same time, it's like absolutely precedented. It just hasn't happened in the AI field the way it has, right? So it's happened in other fields, like camera fields and different technological fields, but we're at this sort of Cambrian explosion right now in AI. So I think the biggest thing that's changed is the number of people using it. I think that's the most important thing that's changed. I think there are more people using AI than when I started. And I think that is the best possible trend.
AI is one of those, first of all, very misunderstood. I was in LA on the weekend and I was meeting my assistant. Yeah, I was just like listening to people's conversations while I was sitting around waiting, and some people talking about AI and when it's going to become sentient and all these other conversations going on. And it's just kind of like, it's just very interesting to see people's different perceptions on artificial intelligence. But it is, as you mentioned, like one of those things, if you look at those markers, there's been, from 1950 to 1970, there were a few big markers there. Then it starts to slow down again and then pick up. 2011 with neural networks is where things started to really exponentially pick up. But literally 2020 to 2022, that is where 95% or 98% of the markers have really happened. Whether it's Whisper AI, whether it's GPT-3 being a very fundamental part of this, like all these different, major shifts, and they're happening all now, and they're getting quicker, faster, more powerful. And you being involved in Stable Diffusion, that's obviously where it must be really exciting to see all of this happening around you.
Yeah, I think to your point of like the last 2 years, right, is like all of like the real like amazing advancements, right? The last 2 years. But the last 40 years is how we understand it, like narratively, right? Like I still have people comment on stuff where they're like, very lawnmower man, and it's like the most sort of like up to date, like recent cultural zeitgeisty references people have for new tech. It's like Ready Player One, and it's like that's the most contemporary like tech narrative, right? So I'm really looking forward to like new tech narratives also. Like I'm definitely living in one, and part of me is like looking forward to writing the memoir in like 20 years of like what this was like. But at the same time, I want to see more like sci-fi movies that are actually like even more contemporary and thinking around AI beyond like AGI, little things that are huge, where it's like we've solved in painting on border edges for animation so that it can replicate those 10 pixels from the last frame to the next frame using the camera depth of 2 frames earlier to calculate the future camera depth. Oh, it's amazing. Like that kind of stuff is like we lose our minds over it, you know, like the majority of people would be like, I'm sorry, in painting, what depth stuff, what's Midas, like who, what, you know? And I think that there's a level of like advancements that we see on a daily basis that are imperceptible by design to any end user, because it's part of the mountain climb, you know. It's like it's one of the 10,000 steps to like get us, you know, to where everyone can see us. So it is exciting. I mean, I think the thing that is most interesting is working in this field where it's engineers and developers who are deeply connected to art making. so it's like at the end of the day, end of the workday, it's sort of like, okay, done with the workday. Now I'm going to animate with the tools I've just been building. So like, you know, days off, weekends are spent experimenting with the stuff that we're building, as opposed to like, you know, like time to leave the shop. I'm going to leave this work behind. It's more like I'm going to turn from this computer, I'm going to go to that computer, and I'm going to keep working, you know? And it's wild, because I think there's another level of like mental acuity and mental faculty that this type of work requires too. I remember back in 6 months ago when I would turn on After Effects every day. But the feeling of like working with keyframes and like getting into a timeline, like building a timeline, hacking out keyframes and working out Bezier curves and timing and all that stuff, right? Very different mental space than I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write 100 lines of descriptions and then hit render and watch my words be interpreted by a neural network of, you know, of basically open clip models and different, you know, parameters that I don't fully know everything that's in there, you know. I'm like sort of, so it feels like I've described it a few times now as like, it feels like watching a rehearsal of theater, where like you give the actors instructions and then you watch the rehearsal and then you get your take and then you give another set of feedback. It's very different than animating. Like animating is very precise, where you're like, you know, be here now, be there, here, very, very precise. And, you know, it feels a lot more like when you set up a shot in AI, it's a lot more like you set the shot up, you have to watch the take. Like it's not you don't get to kind of scrub through yet, you know, you kind of have to set up parameters and then hit bake and then sort of watch. Yeah. And then experience it. So it's really different than other ways of filmmaking. So it is exciting. Yeah, it's my roundabout way of answering that.
No, totally. And the way that I see all of this, it's kind of very similar to my job, where yesterday I go in to work, I sit down in dailies, and everyone shows me what they've done in the last 24 hours. And obviously with AI, time's moving much quicker. But that's when I review it all. I say, okay, that's good. I don't like that. Change that over there. Let's sit down and rethink and rediscuss what I said, because obviously there's a miscommunication there. Everyone goes off, they do their work. I come in the next, which will be this morning, and I'm excited because I can't wait to see what everyone has to show. And I'm hoping some of it's going to be right. I've already planned some people I've got to pull aside and have a proper discussion, because what I'm discussing to them, the words that I'm saying obviously are not resonating. So I need to think of a better way to describe what we're trying to accomplish. And in a lot of ways, the kind of prompt or text to image, that sort of approach is very similar. We're art directing AI to do the work for us, and in the same way that I would communicate to a human. Moving on from there, I think that could be a good setup for you to discuss a bit about, for the layman who's the one person who hasn't jumped on and started becoming a prompt jockey already. Do you want to talk about what Stable Diffusion is?
Yeah, for sure. Right. I forget. I do get into conversations where I presume that people know what all this stuff is. And that's 6 months ago, I would not have. So that's like 6 months ago, I would have been the guy being like, I'm sorry, slow down. What is it? The best way to think about Stable Diffusion is as text to image, right? It's a new creative tool that lets you describe an image in words, and the software will interpret the words and give you a totally unique image from those words. Of course, the words, we call them prompts. So you would prompt the software and it will return back, again, a unique image. Now, the combination that happens in the software is your words get mixed with what's called a seed. And the seed is either a randomly generated number or a number you pick. And that seed is the sort of the basis of a noise pattern. So the reason there's a noise seed that has to interact with your words is because the way the software creates images. The software has 5 billion images compressed down into about 2 gigabytes, which is unbelievable. Like, as any filmmaker, and most people nowadays know scale, right? You get a phone, you get a 512 gigabyte memory on your phone, 512, great. So you could not fit 5 billion pictures on a 512 gigabyte phone unless the pictures were teensy tiny, little bitty tiny like images. Even then, I'm not really sure if you could get 5 billion. So what we have is billions of images that have been compressed to a tiny amount of storage. And the way that's done is by gradually adding noise to every picture until basically what's left is sort of an impression, sort of a latent of what that image was, allowing the compression to be so incredibly powerful, right? So like to compress down all these pictures, basically destroying the pictures using noise, but leaving behind impressions that can then be called with your prompt. And those impressions sort of mix with each other. And that's sort of the way the model is trained. It spends months, in a supercomputer where the software is being trained on concepts, where it's like, it's being shown hundreds of thousands of pictures of horses, different types of horses. They're all getting noise added into them, being dissolved into just, fragments of what was there. And this is all conceptual, basically, sort of explaining a metaphor for it. And so what you have is this piece of software that has billions of images that don't exist as individual images anymore, right? You've got 5 billion images that can be combined with each other. So you have trillions, pause for dramatic effect, trillions,
like that
trillions of potential images in this software we've barely scratched the surface of. Like, that's the amazing thing, is like, so you have the software that you can call up images, you give it a sentence, the sentence will, depending on your phrasing, the order of the words, will return an image that is more or less like what you ask for. Now, some people get really, really detailed with their prompts, where you can say a forest at night in the winter, snowing with deer, in the style of Thomas Kincaid and Thomas Cole. You mix 2 painters, and Greg Rakowski, mix a famous illustrator, you mix 3, 4 painters, and then you say Octane Render, trending on ArtStation, ArtStation HQ, ArtStation HD, Unreal Engine, 4K, 8K, 12K, and you tack on every, you start tacking on all these words, and then you get a picture back that's stunning, right? And the picture is stunning, and it's winter, and there's trees, and there's snow, and there's fog, and it's just incredible. And it looks like 3 master painters and some of the best VFX artists ever got together and in 10 seconds made an incredible picture for you, you know? So that's sort of like the basic level of it is it's taken billions of pictures, and then it requires the thinking and the vocabulary on the other side to sort of conjure or spellcast something out of it. The experience of doing it is interesting because you can have that sentence, you can get that perfect sentence, right? Where you have typed it in and it returns you the most incredible winter landscape. And then you can do it again with the same sentence and you'll get a completely different one, but it's still beautiful. And it's because of the different noise seed. So with the noise seed, you can have, I believe it's in the billions, the number of like billions of possible noise seeds. And the way seeds work is they are adjacent. So you can have the same sentence, you can put in, get the seed, then you could change the seed by like one digit, one adjustment. And then the image will be very similar, but just slightly different. And you can really start to dial in things like, well, changing the order of a few words. Okay, and we change the winter trees to trees in winter, and then like adjust the seed by a tiny bit. And you can start to actually craft a picture. You can actually start to put things in certain ways and using, adjustments in words and in the seed. It's not unlike working in layers in Photoshop and sort of moving something here and there, but it's much more chaotic. That's in a nutshell. Working with the diffusion model is you basically have software that contains trillions of possible images, and then as a user you extract images from it by prompting. And I guess the thing I wanted to sort of point out that I get it blows my mind is that we have trillions of possible images. I know that we've probably produced hundreds of millions at this point, if not more than hundreds, probably billions already in the past few months. And that's still it's still like a tiny fraction of like what's possible, And so like, as I've been thinking about how to work with AI and work with the sort of diffusion model, I've been thinking about it more and more like it's its own sort of like sub-dimension. I'm trying not to use the words multiverse or metaverse. So so I'm going to call it a sub-dimension, but it's like, I think of it like, it's like almost like, okay, so Stable Diffusion is like this box. It's like this sub-dimension that has trillions and trillions of possible images in it, that, you can sort of stick your head in and, sort of steer a camera around and then kind of get what you want, and then come back out. And then you can kind of keep sort of dipping into this. I call it a subdimension because I don't think it's a parallel dimension. I don't think we can exist in it, but it definitely has, within those 5 billion images and those trillions of possible combinations, it has its own, it has its own geography. The abandoned grocery store in the latent space is somewhere near like the zombie infested high school, which is probably somewhere near, like the abandoned mall, but like you can construct a geography in latent space through the relationship of concepts to each other. Mm-hmm. So the different areas of the suburbs, and then combining different concepts of, different like thematic or stylistic concepts is one of the other things that's really exciting. So I guess what I'm trying to say is anybody who's using it for the first time, what matters so much is your vocabulary, is to think about like, what's the style, what's the genre, what does stuff look like, what does it feel like, what does it remind you of, things like the suburbs, things like outside of Pittsburgh, like that means something. Like you can actually use the phrase outside of Pittsburgh, and it will actually start to sort of geolocate in latent space what it understands as outside of Pittsburgh.
It's such a rabbit hole too, because we could then talk about GPT-3 and how that allowed us to be able to communicate to a computer using words like outside of Pittsburgh, whereas before you wouldn't be able to do that because it would interpret it in a very, very rudimentary way. It's one of those things, if you go back to video games, and I'm not talking about like even Atari 2600, but like text-based images, text-based. So I'm on autopilot. I'm like thinking AI.
But you're thinking like adventure. You're thinking like back, yeah.
Like actually,
Bard's Tale.
Because like the easy way to write a video game would be kind of like these conditions, like you would say it's basically 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like It's a choose your own adventure. Even with Sierra games like King's Quest and Leisure Suit Larry, you would
Leisure Suit Larry.
I had to say that one because it's actually really necessary for my point. Like, it was really frustrating that your journey would require you to go pick up an item, and you say pick up the can of Coke off the ground or something, and if you use that word, it would always come back saying if you pick it, it won't heal. In other words, it's saying use a different word. It's really frustrating. So it's get item, do this, and it's kind of training you to have to talk a very specific way. Back then, like, that would be how you would interact with the video game, would be using these very simple prompts. But it'd be very hard back then to think that one day you would be in this photoreal world, let's say like Unreal or something like that, and in virtual reality you could just pick up the item and do your thing. But that's kind of in a lot of ways where we are right now for the layman, where what we're doing from the technology standpoint is amazing, but even the interaction as well, like being able to communicate the way that we are right now, I'm sure very soon it's going to be a very different way, where we're not needing to be as technical about what we're doing. It's going to be a lot more intuitive in a lot of ways as well, versus needing to figure out like a masterful language to communicate to the computer. It'll become, I'm the artist, this is what I want, and being able to get that result a bit more predictably too.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that it's interesting. I have not thought of that parallel, which is it's great. The game parallel of like needing to learn a vocabulary to play the text-based games. Yeah, that is actually a really great metaphor for this, or parallel, because I feel like it might be a good way to think about how to teach this too. Is almost like there is like a sort of game logic to it, and I think for sure my experience has been one of playing. Like this is the closest experience to art, like artistic play, that I've had since I remember when I learning theater, where it's like you play theater games to like learn how to do it. And I feel like you need to sort of play latent space games to learn how to use it, where you're going to combine random concepts and see what happens. And it sort of slaps you on the hand, like, you know, like depending on the different modes you're working in. But yeah, you get back broken images that don't make sense, right, if you don't phrase things properly. But once you sort of learn the sort of structure and the sort of like syntax, yeah, it'll start to reward you. You know, it'll reward you with like amazing images. But to your point of like growing up with an Atari, I never thought this would be possible, that I could type a sentence and see a picture. Like, I'm still reveling at this. Like, I don't know how many times I say it, I will always be like, this shouldn't be possible. Mm-hmm. Like, it should, and it is, you know, and I feel like, okay, well, I have to get past that point in my brain. It shouldn't be possible. Mm-hmm. But it still blows my mind that like we've gotten to a place where, you know, researchers, scientists have figured out methods to convert language into pictures in a split second. Like, we're down to sub 1 second per frame now. I think, you know, we were looking at images the other day that were, you know, 0.7 of a second to return. Yeah, there's a couple folks working on experiments to get they got 5 frames a second. Is something I saw the other day on someone had a notebook they released on GitHub, where they were getting lower resolutions, but 5 frames a second of AI generated images is just incredible.
You mentioned before about, let's say, performing arts and plays, things like that. I mean, when you are talking about 5 frames a second, like that almost becomes like real-time art directing, where it's like, no, move a bit over here. No, make the trees a bit more green. Like, you're getting that real-time feedback versus hitting a button. You know, that way it's ping pong, but now that is a conversation.
It becomes like working with a camera. Yeah. But it becomes like working with the camera and the entire space around the camera without any of the physical like requirements, you know? It's like all the physical has been packed into the software, and it's even unlike Unreal Engine, it's unlike 3D Studio Max or C4D, where you're thinking dimensionally and you're thinking in terms of grids and shapes and dimensions. This is, in my mind, it's sort of almost like you need to start thinking in terms of nerfs, like the nerfs being neural radiance fields, where like you have your camera that's looking into space, and that camera has a frustum, and then everything that it's seeing is the whole thing. Like there's nothing beyond the camera's point of view and what it's capturing, and it's sort of like moving around in space as this just neural radiance field in AI.
But you can talk to the radiance fields and say, be a bit more green, and you can warp reality, you know?
Right. And so the thing that I want to get to is where you have a PlayStation controller where you're just talking into it and you're just like describing your environment and steering your way through it. And I'm sure I feel like we're only weeks away from that, to be honest. Like probably maybe by the time this comes out, someone will have figured it out and it'll be on GitHub and it'll be like a community project. The gamification of it is something that I think is built in. Like I think that there is like a built-in play. It's the trick. The trick is basically, I find is to not exhaust my own willingness to be surprised. There's something about like sitting down and being, I'm going to go somewhere new. I'm going to invent an entirely new place. I never thought like that before. Like I thought about that in terms of writing. I'd think, okay, I'm going to write some scenes, but like I have the idea of like a scene, but I did not think I'd be able to sit and write the scene and see it. Like I did study, filmmaking, and I did draw storyboards for tons of projects. And I've done the pre-production thing where you spend 3 years to get to the spot where you're in the room and you go, wow, I'm finally here, and even with like, I don't know, I feel like it's a different way of working where like I'm thinking now about like, making films specifically within the constructs of text to image, of like defining a space with words. Then from that space, I have an entirely new, apparatus to tell a story inside of. And a really basic way to approach, text to image for filmmakers is for pre-production. So you can use it to develop concept art.
Again, I was just in LA in the last week, so part of going down there, I made sure I had a lot of meetings with Warner Brothers, Amazon, Apple, everyone, and that's the one thing that's changed in the past year. It's not like, oh yeah, we've been doing this and this. We've been sitting down and we'll knock out all these concepts for the new movie with Robert Downey Jr. or this person and that, and what would usually take a week for our people to put together concept artwork, we'll have several by the end of the day. And the director is just like, holy crap, can we do this? Can we change this? And it just becomes this huge interaction between the creatives and not having to wait and let it cook. In other words, the artist do their thing. Now it's just like this interactive thing where then they have their concepts locked, their vision, and then they start planning the movie, the show, whatever they're doing, which is just changing the world alone in that one area.
It's exciting. No, because I think the thing I think we've talked about, and I've talked about a bunch, is how like my hope is that this is going to give us more movies, and it's going to give us better movies that are like better produced, I would hope. So I taught film for the last 10 years at the New School in New York, and one of the biggest takeaways, I'd have students write like, what's your advice to next year's students in the film workshop? And it would always be something like, start sooner than you think. Like you don't have enough pre-production time. Like you always run out of time in pre-production. What we have here is the ability, to visualize.
Get a GPU card. Sorry.
Yeah, right. Buy a better GPU. But we have the ability for directors to visualize in ways that they couldn't before without time and money. And we have ways, I think, for artists to work super quickly and super specifically. And I think that, in terms of like planning a production, you can use text to image in a way to accelerate how you design a show, how you plan it, and ultimately how you get from concept to production. I think this whole process can be accelerated, I think, by anywhere from 10 to 30%, I think. And that's like a conservative estimate. Some people want to be extreme and be like, it's cut the pre-production time in half, and maybe for some people it has, which is amazing. So that's a basic way of working with it, right? You can describe your scenes. You can take scenes from your script. I've done this a bunch. You take scenes from a script, you drop it into text to image, and then you reword the script over and over and over until you get the picture. And I've seen it and I've done it and I've helped Hollywood directors do it, and it works. And for screenwriters, it's a really big thing to think about. Do you learn or do you develop an approach to write for the text to image machine, right? Most writers will be like, fuck no, absolutely not, no way. Or, you know, do you continue to just write in the classic way, which think about the format for screenplays. Interior, right? You have a slug line, interior, subway station, night, you know, main character, description of their clothing, how they're moving, where they're moving through, what they do, right? Like the main character does whatever in the place and da-da-da. You grab that, you drop it into text to image, and you're going to get like probably a broken thing. But you can start to reshape the sentence where you can sort of describe, you know, if you want to describe the location, okay, so interior, subway station, night, that's going to give you trillions of different random subway stations. But it's like, okay, Barcelona subway station, moody, cinematic, anamorphic, low angle, misty, crowded, beige, no green, no blue. You know, it's hard to describe it. And then next thing you know, boom, you've got this incredible shot, and you go, that's exactly what that's what I was thinking. That was the thing. I swear I thought that. As a writer, you have the potential, I think. This is the thing. I got a master's degree in screenwriting, and I've been trying to get my grad school friends from Emerson to like give this a shot. You know, like take your writing, put your writing in here. I think as a writer, the experience of getting to the image so quickly, I think is going to impact the way. Not just that, it won't impact just the syntax. I think it'll impact the syntax of the way scripts are written, and I think it will impact the specificity with which writers can approach scenes. So I think on that level, right, pre-production, but you go back before pre-production, it's writing. And I imagine writers working with text to image while they're writing scripts as an entirely new way of thinking about screenwriting and an entirely new way of thinking about storytelling. That's pretty much the whole idea. Yeah.
No, I think it's brilliant because it's also a communication. Like a lot of people love to use big words that are very ambiguous and try to essentially make themselves sound important and smart, but like an effective communicator is usually at, let's say, a grade 7 level. And it's one of those things that's kind of like, if you interpret that a certain way, it means that if a grade 7 person can understand the concept, which is why I love Wired Magazine on YouTube, they'll do videos where it's like John Carmack will explain engineering and computer graphics programming to on 3 different levels. One will be at an academic level, but one will be at a grade 3 level. And if he can explain how 3D rendering works or a BSP tree works to a grade 3 person, then it means like, wow, like you're a very good communicator. And with certain people like that, they do a terrible job, because that's the problem, is that they're on a whole other level. But the main thing is that it's kind of the same way. If you can communicate to AI in a certain way, like you should hopefully know that you're descriptive enough that you're actually communicating effectively to everyone else, that they can visualize that thing. Like I love books where I feel like I'm there in the book. Like and then you see a movie or something, and like, this is exactly how I'd been envisioning that book for the last 10 years. One thing I really find intriguing is on YouTube, a lot of people now are getting the song lyrics from whatever, Billie Jean for Michael Jackson, and then they'll put it in and generate all of these different images, and the music video or whatever they're playing on YouTube is just a slideshow of all these text inputs. But it's actually doing most of the time a really effective job at telling the story of the song as you're going through the thing, like Bye Bye American Pie. It's you're seeing it all. It's just like occasionally there's something weird, which I think is fun to include, but a lot of the time it's like, wow, like you're telling visually the story of the song, and it's really fascinating just to see all the different ways it's being used in day-to-day life.
The architect of Dream Studio is this brilliant guy named Tom Mason, and Tom developed a whole number of shorts. This is about a year ago, like in December, January, February, these short films taking poetry and using the poetry line by line to animate the film. He's got a whole number of these films. His handle is Nin Artificial, Nin, Nin Artificial.
There's also Stability AI as well, right?
Yeah. So Tom's our CTO, right? He's the chief technology officer, and Tom is the architect, of Dream Studio, which is the main product for Stability's text to image service. Where people can use Stable Diffusion. And Tom and I met because of his animation tools. So Tom's journey has been one of taking poetry and making images out of poetry into making films out of it, into understanding, well, then there's got to be a better way to make films with these tools than just code, because that's where it was. I mean, that's sort of still where we are. Like, we're at the end of 2022 and we are inching forward, right? Some would say we are racing forward towards a graphic user interface with a timeline and with keyframes and with, all the things. And we've got that in progress. We've got a version of that timeline in progress. And, that's the next step, is evolving the way we work with AI from blocks of text in code banks that output, images, to more traditional ways of, and I say traditional as in the last 30 years of nonlinear editing, traditional, but the way we think of, film strips and takes and time in a linear fashion. Using poetry to create narrative is something that, I feel like it's like an absolutely natural, logical extension. And then of course, let's take a song, it has a beat. You can extract from the song the rhythm of the music as well. So you can have the music inform the images along with the language. Like, the language can define the image, and then the music could actually affect the image. And there's a whole bunch of different, notebooks, these community notebooks of ways to use the software people have come up with, where it will extract a beat. It will also auto-generate images based on the text. Someone wrote a notebook where you can auto-generate AI music videos from YouTube by pulling a video and reading all the captions and then turning the captions into the text. And it could just be an auto. It's like a one-click AI music video. It still takes the time to process, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world that we're in. One thing that I find is like a big misinterpretation, and you alluded to this in the very beginning when you were mentioning, let's say a file might be, was it 2 terabytes or 2 gigabytes? Probably 2 terabytes for all the images off the internet. And that's one of the big misunderstandings, is that a lot of people, I think that the AI is photoshopping an arm from here and a tree from there and putting this all together. And it's just that alone, the fact that all the images off the internet, where there's a lot, and obviously it's being trained on a very specific set of images, not all of them, but it is one of those things that clearly you're not downloading all the images off the internet and trying to Photoshop and hack things together. It's learning and observing all this the same way that someone might be able to study different styles of artwork and be able to then do it themselves. It's learning how to do that, so that way it can then draw and replicate all of that stuff. And it's doing that where the brain is a set size. It's not all these images just being in a zip file. It's occasionally, pulling something out from. I just think that like that alone just kind of like ends that whole conversation. The fact that it's basically the brain versus the all the sources that it's really pulling from.
Yeah. Well, there's a common misconception that people have too, where they say, oh, the AI is learning. I've been putting in prompts and it's learning from my prompts.
People get excited.
And yeah, they get excited. But really what's happening is like the user is learning. There is a fixed set of data, right? It was like, so and what we currently have right now are, there's sort of like, well, I'd say there's like, there's, I don't want to underestimate, I don't want to overestimate, but you've got about a half a dozen different companies that have text to image models, right? And they work on different data sets. And the way the data set works for what we have is Stable Diffusion is based on the Lion 5B data set, which is more or less a scrape of the entire internet that was available, and images that were then cleaned and labeled and then put together specifically, to be understood and to be trained for concepts, it's fixed. Like once it's all compressed down and it's sitting on your computer as Stable Diffusion, 2.0 pruned 2 gigs, that doesn't change on your machine. And there's this logic of, you prompt it, you get an image back, and then you prompt it again, you get a different image. And what's happening is, you're getting one of billions within that concept because of different seeds. And then, the users are learning, because it always blows my mind when people, they sort of think that they're training the AI further than it already. It's a very different thing. When an actual model is being trained is very different than when it's being used. And so the way I keep thinking about it metaphorically is rather than like a brain that's imagining and drawing for us, I like to sort of visualize it as if it's like you give it the concept, and it's like there's like 2 pieces of stone that are being sort of mashed together, and it's like they're like almost like sandstone that are just within split seconds. 2 pieces of sandstone are just rapidly mashing up against each other, and then your image is left behind. And that's the way I think of it, and part of the reason I think of it that way is because when I started working with early the early development of Stable Diffusion, they call them checkpoints, like early checkpoints, like 1.1, 1.2. They were very small images, but you could see this sort of grainy, pixelated thing about it. And it sort of made me feel like it was like, sandblasted or something, same with like Dall-E 2. Dall-E 2, everything kind of has like, it looks like it kind of has like almost like a Cheeto coating over it. It's like a Cheeto dust, but it feels like it's been sort of sandblasted out of stone. There's a lot of bad faith arguments that I've seen. Not a lot. I've seen a few bad faith arguments by people saying the AI stole my picture. And it's often the sentence should be, a person stole my picture and put it through AI and on specific settings, and it looks like the AI stole my picture, but they didn't. Workflow is a big part of this, right? So like we keep talking about text to image. There's a whole other workflow called image to image. And image to image is where like the Hollywood and filmmaking communities are, I think, going to find a whole nother level of production value. So like, I think text to image is great for concepting. Image to image is great for VFX. Image to image allows me to take something like, I could take this recording of me talking, and I could put this through Stable Diffusion, and I can describe, I could use text to augment the image. So when the AI sees me, it could be, it could put me in a field of flowers with sunset and a mountain behind me, and the AI will look at this footage of me, right? And it will frame by frame try to understand the language and the prompt, and it will reimagine this scene based on the guidance of this video footage, right? Like I become video guidance. You can use an initial image, which is a still picture that from there the AI can go off from, or you can use video guidance, which I think video guidance is the future of this whole thing. I've been working with video guidance nonstop for the past month now. And I think the first time we talked about a month ago. And since then, I've been working with video guidance to discover what's possible. And it is mind-blowing. You can do video to animation now, like we're getting close to it being easy for everyone. But folks who have the patience, a little bit of coding acumen, and the sort of discipline of a filmmaker and animator to try again, you can take existing footage and guide it through animation software that you describe it with words, the changes you want to see, and it'll come out the other side reimagined. People are using it to take live action footage and turn it into anime. And it's incredible. Like you can do anime. Anime is probably the easiest of all because the way it's trained. In terms of the data, there's a huge data set for anime. It understands it really well, and the outlines and the sort of high contrast forms translate really nicely. But yeah, you can use it to do, it's called style transfers is the general concept. And I've seen some folks working on it where they're doing style transfers using a combination of live footage on green screen They've keyed it out. They've tracked the footage. They've used Stable Diffusion to make a replacement of a face and a replacement of a shirt. Then they use Blender to track and map the face onto the person. And then they're doing essentially, like live action to 3D animation. So, because they can map a Stable Diffusion face onto the video footage, but using they can use depth to image to actually track the face and have the depth of the face properly adhere. And so the pipelines that people are building right now are complicated as hell. Like, they're not beautiful. They're not easy. Like, I'm going to take my video, put it in, it's going to come out animated. It's still a process. It's still like a whole pilgrim's process of like, we're going to have to go one thing after another and build it up and actually try to have like a scaffold underneath it to make it work. And I think that's the future of it, though. I think video guided AI, video guided diffusion is more compelling to me than I could have imagined. I think there's a handful of images or a handful of videos on the web now, like a handful of, a few thousand images where you can see live footage changing. Some of it's done using PyTorch or PyTie, where it's like PyTie is like you can see things kind of become instantly super trippy, like very like LSD, like smearing, and then it goes back to normal. That's a little bit different from video guidance, which is more like it's like impossibly detailed animation, impossibly like smooth. And so it's like instead of doing mocap, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of doing a full body motion capture, you can basically just do it with video, and you can take a 2D video and then interpret it with the AI, which uses 3D computer vision. So it'll take the 2D, create 3D depth maps, and then paint onto those depth maps as an understanding of like what it's looking at. But it does require like the steering, like the frame by frame kind of, somebody has to watch it and kind of keep an eye on it as it comes out, pause it, re-steer it, adjust it, and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I mean, this is just the beginning. Yeah, I mean, it's so exciting. Like, what would be some go-to resources? And obviously, I'll link to Dream Studios, Stable Diffusion. Because I think everyone should be following you and seeing all the not only the fascinating things you're doing, but also just the fascinating things you're talking about. Not only are you doing all this, but in case it's not obvious to anyone, you're very excited about where this is all heading. So, but in terms of video and things like that, a lot of what you talked about, like, are there any go-to resources to keep up to date? Is there any keywords in terms of, hey, go look this up and go down that rabbit hole?
So in terms of best resources, I'm going to point straight to Corridor Digital. I think the guys at Corridor and Corridor crew are doing the Lord's work of experimenting, evangelizing, and teaching. So they're like, I think that they're doing great stuff. Stability is going to be starting doing live streams pretty soon. I'll probably be hosting them, some of them. So I'm going to start doing live streams to look at different prompting approaches and techniques. I'll probably end up doing some marathon prompting sessions because I do them anyway. So it's sort of like, why not just live stream the 12 hours of prompting that I try to squeeze in? And then, we're going to do more tutorials on video production. YouTube's the best resource in general, I think, for this because it moves so quickly. One of the problems is trying to get it right means that time passes. And so when time passes in AI, a year is gone and the technology's completely flipped. So part of this experience requires people who want to like live on the bleeding edge and are okay with like technology being completely obsolete within a few weeks of learning it, which was my experience when I got into VR. I got into VR around like 2014, 2015. I got the DK2 kit and I was like, okay, I'm nauseous. Okay, but fine. And I got cameras in 2015, 2016, and the VR cameras were obsolete within a few weeks. I think with this, I think YouTube's best. I think, like I said, Corridor Crew is amazing. The thing that it's tricky is that a lot of people are figuring out amazing things and are keeping it secret because it becomes a way to make money.
Yeah.
You know, and it's fair. Like, I don't have, it's hard for me to say, like, don't keep your secrets, you know, like, of course, like, go ahead, figure out your secret, keep your secrets. But people are going to keep figuring out the secrets and then teaching them and sharing them. And I think that we're kind of on that cusp of, like, part of what needs to happen is, as a creator, right? So people who want to get into using AI in film, best things to do are to get on Twitter and get on Instagram. The two sets of artists are so different. The artists on Instagram are so different from the artists on Twitter. It's mind-boggling. It is like two completely bifurcated communities of artists on Instagram who kind of don't care what you think and, like, make whatever they want. And it's amazing. And I feel like with Twitter, there's a whole other level of sort of inquiry and exposure and critique. Like, Twitter is very critical, and that's by design. I think Twitter is where, like, all the scientists hang out, all the researchers are. Anything you put up on Twitter is going to be investigated and critiqued in a very different way than Instagram, where it's going to very much be about, you know, keep swiping, watch the reels, enjoy it, have fun, you know. And I think TikTok's a whole other conversation. Now, the cool thing, there's some really cool people on Instagram who they share all their tools. So, like, Hello Personality is one of the greats, right? Hello Personality is super popular. And if you go to Hello Personality stuff on Instagram, on the link tree, it's like, here are the tools I use. And you can click on it. It brings you to Disco Diffusion. It brings you to Warp Fusion, brings you to Stable Diffusion. It's awesome. Like, that's the way to go. And then I would say there's a couple other folks who do explainers. Coffee Vectors is a really talented artist who's on every platform, who will do a video and then break it down shot by shot. There's another artist named Scotty Fox who's doing that too. And I could, like, rattle names left and right, but basically, basically, there's a whole host of them that I've been learning from. There's a lot of artists who I think are willing to answer questions in the comments, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like, and this is the kind of thing, like if I were teaching a class on AI filmmaking and someone asked me, like, where can we learn all this stuff, professor? Aren't you just going to tell us? And it's like, well, the best place is the comments. Like, it's one of those rare things where, like, it depends on the community too. Like, I think with Twitter, there's a lot of folks who've done a good job of just blocking the noise. You just, I don't give anybody, there's, like, if somebody says something stupid, I just block them. That's it. Like, I don't have any patience for it. And I think that that's the best way to work, so that I can, in good faith, answer somebody's question and say, like, here's the answer. I don't know you. I have no idea. You with 5 followers on Twitter, you might be a machine learning scientist who's a genius who just doesn't like Twitter. Like, but I can answer them in good faith, and it's the same in Instagram. So like the secrets are often in the comment threads on some of these videos and YouTube videos where people can learn. I think we're a few months away from it becoming a sort of software, I don't want to say race, but I think there's going to be a software race of, like, who has the best AI software interface, because we're still in early days. How the heck Midjourney is still getting away with being a Discord bot, I don't know, but it's just a bot on Discord with, like, a couple buttons. And I mean, good on them for making that work with like, their website's beautiful where you can scroll through your past, creations. But the creative act is a Discord bot, Dall-E 2 is the same. Dall-E 2 is just a line, of text where you enter and then you get your square pictures. And, they've started to add more features with Dall-E 2, but that's becoming clip art, where it's getting integrated into Microsoft Word and stuff like that. The phase we're entering now, I think the next 6 months to a year, is going to be all about the GUI. It's all about, like, what's the user interface? How do we interact with it? How can we interact with AI over time before the time has happened? Like, this is the thing that we can do with filmmaking, right? Like, you have your footage, it's in the timeline. I can scrub to 5 minutes and see what's there and scrub back. Now with AI, it's like, I can't scrub forward 5 minutes because it has to think through those 5 minutes to get there. And so, like, that's the thing, is, like, how do we get to a place where you can sort of pre-compose a shot that's a few hundred frames deep, that's the shot's reliant on the prior 300 frames. How do you compute those 300 frames in a split second so I can jump to 300 and say, okay, here's what 300 looks like. Okay, I'm going to, by 500, I want to be here.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to be in an arms race in terms of the software, which I'm here for. Like, I'm so excited. I can't wait for the next 2 to 5 years of like the best possible new versions of After Effects and Cinema 4D and Dream Studio, where, you know.
And it's kind of like most people will always say, oh man, I can't wait to see what this is going to be like in 10 years. And it's just like, wait 10 months, like it will not be recognizable.
Yeah. I hope I come back in 10 months and where we look at this and we're like, oh my gosh, this is mind blowing. Oh, who knows? It might be in 10 years or 10 months rather, we might still be coding. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting time. But Bill, this has been awesome to nerd out about all this stuff. I think that for a lot of people who aren't familiar, it's going to be a chance to be like, okay, now I'm really intrigued. But I also feel like everything we've talked about, for everyone who's in it, I think this episode is more especially for them, because it's a chance to be like, yeah, like this is the stuff that no one around me I can talk to because they just think I'm crazy. So
that's me. This is the guy. I feel like I'm nuts. There's that joke of like, you don't go to a party and talk about AI. It's just not allowed anymore. Yeah, no, it's true.
This has been really awesome. I'll make sure to link to everything in the show notes, but just for anyone who's lazy, where can people go to find out more about you? And also, where can people go to find out more about Stability Diffusion?
So I go by William Cusick on all of the socials. So William Cusick at Twitter, William Cusick at Instagram, William Cusick on LinkedIn. Follow me, reach out. My email is bill@stability. I'm at stability.ai. And yeah, if folks want to learn about Stable Diffusion or Stability, our website is stability.ai. We got blog posts, we've got links to our API, we've got links to our documentation, and we've got lots of news articles that will explain how we got here and I think where we think we're going. I really encourage folks who are enthusiastic to reach out, and we are hiring, we are looking for engineers, we're looking for developers. We are a growing company in a growing industry filled with really enthusiastic people who are pretty obsessed with advancing all these things. So it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I love this. This is like, I could talk about this forever. So thanks so much.
It's been awesome, man. Thank you.